Hi, and welcome to the Route to CISO podcast. It's me, Chris Rides. I'm going to be your host, and I'm going to be chatting to seasoned Chief Information Security Officers about their career journeys. We're going to be unencrypting their real-life stories and searching for the hidden keys to help you fast-track your cybersecurity career. I've got this is one of the initial ones where me and Chris don't really know each other that well. We were only just recently introduced thanks to Larry Whiteside Jr. So I've got Chris Carter with me, who I'm delighted to find out all about your career because I don't really know a whole lot about it. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely, which should make it a fun conversation.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So I think a good place to start is really just, what are you up to at the moment?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you for having me on as a guest. Kudos to you for all the great work that you're doing outside of the podcast, as well as, on the podcast and, making people more aware of the importance of cybersecurity and how we live, how we play, how we work, how we raise our kids. In terms of what I'm doing now, I think I have a pretty full plate. I usually get up pretty early in the morning, around 3:30, 4 o'clock, hit the gym, and then by 7 o'clock, I'm on with clients. So right now, I'm working as an independent consultant, uh, providing support, thought leadership to non-for-profits, small to medium-sized business, and currently I have one Fortune 500 company that I'm helping build out and reorient their cybersecurity program.
Fantastic. Good. Yeah, it seems like that's a nice varied patch of things to be doing.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm loving it, enjoying it.
Yeah, never a boring day as a CISO, right?
Right.
Well, I feel like a lot of CISOs hope for a boring day because sometimes you need the odd one of those, right? No big problems to deal with. Now, I think a good place to start would be really to find out, like, prior to getting into cyber, what was your background? What were you doing? And then move on to, like, how did you end up getting into cyber?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I have a very interesting turn in cyber. Most of my colleagues, they start out being a hacker, they were hacked, and then eventually they develop the desire to, hack back or do something. On the other hand, my journey into cybersecurity leadership has been very interesting, and the evolution has been quite interesting, I would say, because I started out as a financial analyst at a multinational organization. Uh, a year and a half into that role, I was able to streamline some of our processes, our close processes, that then propelled me into an international controller, where I had the fortune of living in Europe for about 2 years. Um, and that's when I would say, my first exposure to IT was, and I had the opportunity to kind of lead the project from a finance perspective. But even though it was a financial role, I was curious enough to understand, or curious enough to ask, have conversations around what we were doing. At the time, we were implementing the largest worldwide ERP system for a company called Baxter International.
Hmm.
And from there, unfortunately, I was laid off. They had a huge rift. I was laid off, and then moved while I was in Belgium. Moved back to US, act as a consultant. Don't want to date myself too much, but I was one of the first consultants who did the Sarbanes-Oxley audit testing and things like that, which again was kind of the step towards cyber. From there, I worked for another company called Vasco Data Security. Vasco Data Security at the time was a data security company, and we had just gotten hit by an attacker out of Iran. We had just purchased a company called DigiNotar in the Netherlands. We had a massive breach where the Dutch authority came in, took over the company, and from there, I kind of pivoted. I transitioned to Zurich Insurance, which is a large multinational insurance company, which, in my mind, looking back, it was a natural progression. I started out as the head of, or as a reporting analyst. A year later, I moved up into managing the team, where we primarily focused on GRC, looking at controls, ensuring that controls were meeting the requirements, and from there, we learned quickly that the world was shifting. We needed to have a good understanding of what the controls are doing. At the end of the day, being in security, you have to understand what you're protecting. And I think smartly we made the move of starting to move more into an advisory role where we started looking at the security metrics, looking at the technical controls, as well as I would say, the administrative controls around how we're protecting the company's assets. One of the things we
Brilliant.
said when we were at Zurich is they don't have a product, they have a promise to insure customers' risk, right? To take that risk transfer. So we had it was a high stakes game, global organization, and we worked closely with the different regions, so um, it wouldn't be unusual for me to be up at 2 o'clock in the morning talking to someone in Singapore or someone in Japan or someone in Hong Kong about, controls or something that's happening, right? That was, again, the natural progression to CISO role. I would say fast forward a couple of years, I then moved under the KKR umbrella. KKR is a PE company,
Hmm.
and they have a portfolio of companies which enabled me to act as not only as an advisor but as a CISO, head of security. As an advisor, I worked with multiple Fortune 100 companies, building out their zero trust models, ensuring that they had all the necessary controls in place to again protect their environment. And then recently, in the CISO role I was a team of one, so build out their security awareness program, stood up a incident response program. We also had a framework that we built out, and then basically gave them a roadmap to kind of finish the journey. So it's been that's a long way in terms of my career, but that's kind of the trajectory that I've been on.
You've you've given that to us really concisely and nicely, and I know that there's a whole bunch of stories in there. There's no way you can go through that without a whole bunch of interesting stories, I'm sure. So let's start back. So first of all, so you lived in Belgium for a little while.
Yes,
How
absolutely.
did you find that? Because I think that's an interest. We've not really approached that much on here and talked about, living in other countries and the differences of doing that and being willing to sort of pick up and travel for roles. So yeah, how did you find that?
So I was quite young at the time. I think I was still in my formidable years. And I would say it's one of the best. I hated the experience. The first 4 months, I don't know if I should say this on the podcast, but I would cry myself to sleep because, I didn't understand the language. I didn't understand the food. Cultural habits were different. I
Mm.
remember once I went to a grocery store. Bought milk and cereal, and the milk was outside of the refrigerator. I picked up the milk, brought it home, and Monday morning I got up to eat my breakfast, and I poured the milk on the cereal and started eating it. And when I started eating it, I found out that it was baby milk, right? Because I couldn't understand the labels. So there's a lot of stories like that, but I think the lesson learned is working in different and unusual environments.
Yeah, and did you end up having to learn the language while you were there? Did yeah.
Yeah, no, and interestingly enough, no, I didn't have to learn the language because it most people in Belgium, it's kind of the center of
Yeah.
Europe, right? Most people spoke English. But I tried learning it, and I think you have this thing when you speak English, you're not good at learning a second language. I don't know what it is.
No, I find the same. I speak like a tiny bit of German, and I found I used to go to Germany quite a bit. We had friends of the family, so I'd go for a few weeks at the time. And the idea was that I would practice my German, but everybody just wanted to practice their English,
The
and so
English, exactly.
I'd say a tiny bit of something in German, and then they would reply to everything into me in English. And so I'm sure it's much the same. And if you were working for Baxter Healthcare, you're working for a big global company, and what you tend to find in global companies is English is generally the language that everybody
Right,
speaks at work, right? So
right, right.
yeah, so I
So
get you.
I
So
I did pick up a little bit, like you said, a little bit of French, which at some point in the podcast we'll talk about how that little bit of understanding of French enabled me to carry, to carry out my remit in another role. But yeah,
Okay, all right, yeah, I will definitely let's make sure that we do hit on that. The
we'll
next
hit
thing
on
I was
that.
going to
Yeah.
ask you was just about like you said you sort of went up and you were doing an individual contributor role, and then you got made a manager of a team. How did that happen? Because that's a really tough jump that a lot of people find. You know, some people, yeah, it happens quite naturally, but usually there's a lot of stuff that's gone on in the backgrounds, even if it does feel like quite a smooth move.
No, it's, one of the things and I remember at the time my mentor said, you came out of the gate swinging, right? So one of the things I remembered was I made a mistake early on in my first year, and I just owned up. I was talking to my boss's boss at the time. I said, "Yep, I made that mistake. It won't happen again." And so there were moments like those that showed that, there was potential. So I would always try to get things done before, get things done on time, or before, if I didn't, I would collaborate, and I worked very well with my peers. And I think that was very helpful. Now, when you transition to the manager level, it's a different story, right?
Yeah, and but as a manager, like you realize even more at that point how good it is to have somebody that's willing to put their hand up when they made a mistake or come to you when they realize it, or if you realize it and ask and somebody says, oh, that's me, rather than wasting us so much time trying to find out where the problem was and where the issue is. And the people that are brave enough to put their hand up are the ones that get more attention and end up taking on board, I think, anyway, a lot better, and that helps later on in the career. So honest employees, I wish that, yeah, I
Refreshing.
wish it was common sense, that sort of stuff, but it's just unfortunately not, right?
Right.
Now,
So yeah,
so
it's
let's talk. Yeah, go on. Sorry, Chris. Go on, carry on.
no, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. I interrupted you. Go
So I
ahead.
was just going to go back on the. I'm interested how the learning a little bit of French has helped you. So yeah, let's jump in on that story. I want to hear that one.
Okay, so when I left Baxter, I was laid off. They had a big riff, financial reasons. I think they ended up cutting
Yeah.
about 3,200 folks worldwide. I was a part of that, and so I left Baxter, and then I got recruited into a small, I wouldn't say small, but medium-sized consulting company. And from there, I jumped to a company called Vasco Data Security. I think today now they're called OneSpan. So I was hired, I think, somewhere around the middle of October. The person that I was going to transition to work from, unfortunately, that person died. All
Oh
his
my
work was
goodness.
in all his yeah, all his work was in French. So after accepting the role, signing the contract, my then boss, called and say, "Hey, Chris, we're going to need you to start early, and by the way, we're going to need you to be in Belgium by in the next couple of days." He explained, "Hey, Paul recently died, and we need to close the books. We got to close Q3 at the time, and we have to start preparing for Q4." So went over, and this to me, this was one of the early lessons that I learned as a security professional that I didn't know would be useful until further down in my career. So went over there, and everything was in French. So I think I have like a week to close the books, a week to learn about the company, a week to catch up on my French, and go have at it. And it was minimal support. So I literally at the time, again, I'm dating myself. I think Google was just coming on the scene, or we were using Yahoo at the time. So
Yeah.
I used some Translate, but it was very rudimentary. So some of the words I recognized, but there were technical business terms that I just couldn't recognize. In some cases, I had to make decisions. Just okay, um, here's what I'm going to do. But I think the little French that I learned back when I was at Baxter enabled me to, successfully close the books and, have a successful year-end close. But it was painful. It was, again, I had to go back to Belgium, which was not too far from where Baxter was, but it was one of those things where unfortunately someone had passed away But as you know, for an organization that's for profit, you're going to have to get things done.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah. And did they assume that because you'd lived in Belgium before that you'd just be able to pick it up because it was in French, or was there like was there, did they not even know it was in French sort of thing?
I think I think it was a combination of both. The assumption is that, oh yeah, he's been to Belgium. He knows. He's been there before. He probably understands the culture and some of the language. And we kind of went with that. I was truly excited. Fortunately, most people, I mean, in in Belgium, they speak French and Flemish, Dutch.
Yeah.
Um, and most of the people I worked with were from Flanders, were Flemish, so they spoke English. Paul, the guy who died at the time, he spoke French, so his notes were in French, and even the numbers, right? The way Europeans write one is very different than the way Americans write one. But it's those little nuances that
Yeah.
I had to pivot really quickly on and understand and close the books.
It's a lot. That's yeah, certainly a lot to jump into. What prior to going to Backstar, did you go to college, or what was your sort of educational background? Where were you?
So yeah, my undergrad is in economics and finance. So graduated with a kind of a double major with finance and economics. So not only did I was able to close the books, but I understood the economic impact of the larger picture, so to speak. So went to college here in Chicago and
Hmm.
graduated, and maybe a month after graduation, I was hired by Baxter.
And they sent you straight out to Belgium because that's an interest. Like for somebody to graduate, get a job in Chicago, and then end up in Europe quite quickly.
No, so I I was here, and it was again dating myself right around 9/11, right? I graduated
Right.
right around
Yeah.
that time, and I stayed there for about a year and a half, 18 months.
Hmm.
I was hired as a financial analyst, closing the books, figured ways to close, to shrink the close. Because, in finance, you have what you call the monthly close. There's specific
Hmm.
things you have to do. You have to reconcile the accounts. You have to, you know, meet certain regulatory requirements. So I was able to take 2 days out of that. And I think as a reward for shrinking the close process, they said, okay, what do you want to do? I said, just send me somewhere that I've never been before. And it was, yeah, I ended up going to Belgium.
There you go. Good. The Belgian fries, very good. Although they eat them with mayonnaise, which is a really weird thing for me. I'm not down with the mayonnaise thing, but there you go. So, so you, so then you were saying that you then worked your way up. Then how did you went into socks that then kind of put you more on that sort of cyber security path, which makes sense, right? Sarbanes Oxley, like from a financial standpoint. How did you end up getting your first CISO role?
So the first CISO role, that's probably years later. The CISO role kind of happened when I was at Baxter, when I was at Zurich.
Right,
I
insurance.
always
Yeah.
try to take on more than I was supposed to, but it didn't actually happen at Zurich. I was it was a volunteer role. I was working for a non-for-profit at the time, and I said, "Hey, there are things that I'm learning at Zurich. Why not help you, secure your, putting controls in place, doing malware scans and things like that. Help them out with the security awareness training program. I think two-factor authentication was something that was just coming in. I helped them with that. And then, so that was kind of on a pro bono basis.
Yeah.
Officially, my CISO role was with KKR. And I
Yeah.
started KKR around 2022 or so.
That's really interesting, and it's funny. So when we talk a lot to people that are trying to move their career along in security, especially like at the entry level, but actually further down, we don't really think about it so much further down in your career, but helping non-profits, helping small businesses. Like a lot of companies are okay with you doing that on the side. It shows your passion, but also it gives you access and experience of a lot more different areas that perhaps you're not getting in your current role. So I'm excited that you brought that up because you I've had that brought up by somebody else as well, and I think that we don't talk about that enough. Maybe at the experience level, bringing that in, getting the experience. So that's brilliant. So then you joined KKR, um, Zurich straight to KKR.
Zurich
Yeah.
straight to KKR, yes, yeah.
Okay. And then at KKR, what did you join them as CISO, or did you rise up to that position?
No, I kind of transitioned into that role. So KKR specifically, I worked for a company called Optiv.
Oh,
Um,
right.
in normal everyday nomenclature, you would say they're a VAR, right? They do a lot of selling of products and services. Um, and there is where I advised a lot of CISO. One of the things we did was we would do comparison of technologies. We would do education, thought leadership. We would hold workshops around zero trust was a big thing. I headed up a process at Optiv around how we kind of put zero trust in normal business language and led the team. We developed enablement material and we
Yeah.
were able to use that to educate and provide thought leadership to our clients.
And so you were doing a lot of client facing. Were you like kind of field CISO? Were you looking after the internal security as well, or just the sort of being that field front of house almost?
I was kind of the face, kind of a solutions architect working with CISOs. And some occasions, I would literally tutor CISOs on how to talk to their CFOs. I remember in one occasion, I was on vacation in Florida, and the CISO was it was close to it was budget time, and I
Yeah.
literally sat in the parking lot. My son was eating his food and on the side, Dad, let's go, let's go. But we were talking about, okay, what exactly are you trying to get? What message are you trying to send to your CFO? At the time, he was looking to expand his budget. So I said, well, you really have to break it down in business terms, speaking a language that your CFO can understand and appreciate, and partner with you to right. Let him own right. We're buying down risk. We don't, you don't say I'm buying another piece of technology. We're going to buy down risk, and here's how we invest in this piece of capability, and that capability happens to be this technology. So we had a lot of you know um, engagements like that. In some cases, we would provide thought leadership on where their security program is, how mature the program is, what it will take them to get from, a level 3 to a level 4 or level 1 in some cases, to a level 2.5 or 3. So there's a lot of those conversations, which kind of pivoted me into, okay, you keep telling people how to do this. Why don't you go do it yourself? And that's when I pivoted into the head of security slash CISO role.
Brilliant. And at that point, that was still a Optiv,
That was at
or that was at the
another
new.
KKR portfolio company.
Okay. All right. Good. So that's interesting. Because speaking to Larry, who we both know well,
Yeah,
there's a guy called Nick Bruno, Andy Smeaton, all of those guys. They were all on a panel at InfoSec World, and they were talking about being that kind of front of house face. Some of them are working for VARs, solutions providers, as a CISO. Some of them have access. Some of them are managing, the actual solutions security, for a corporate level. But
yeah,
many of
yeah.
them are still pulled into that front of house stuff. So it's interesting. I feel like there really is, there's so many different, routes to CISO, right? Right there,
Right.
there really is. It's not that every CISO seems to obviously be very different, and this podcast shows very different backgrounds, and then they are either good or they're passionate about certain types of CISO roles, whether they'll be strategic CISO roles, or whether they're more tactical CISO roles, more hands-on or less
Right.
hands-on. So it's really interesting to talk to different CISOs and hear about that. I'm interested, your financial background, I feel like that would be really beneficial for a CISO, especially you said mentioned about budgets, right? That's some of
Right.
the toughest stuff to have discussions around. What are the different things that you think maybe CISOs that don't have a financial background should learn about that would help them in their career or help them do a better job?
That's a perfect segue. I'm gonna make a shameless plug. I'm actually doing a LinkedIn Live session to talk just about that topic because
Brilliant.
one of the things I think CISOs we struggle with is the basic concepts, right? I was just talking to a client earlier, and we talked about the difference between accrual versus cash basis accounting. What does that mean? Cash basis versus accrual, or capex versus opex. When you move to a cloud model, for example, that means your opex is probably going to go up. You're not going to spend so much on capital expenditures. So, those are, I think understanding, right, basic concepts like that, capex, opex, accrual, cash, understanding the different statements and the impact you have on each of those statements. One is the P&L or the income statement. Where do you fit in that income statement, and how will you impact that income statement, right? So if you're going with the cloud-based model, more likely than not, that's going to be considered run cost, and so your dollar spent is actually going to be flowing through the P&L, right?
Right.
And then your investments on the balance sheet, right, is just cash to asset, right? So you build up the asset, right? Once the asset is mature, you then reduce the asset by pulling the depreciation of that asset into your income statement. And then so over time, one of the things we always joked about in finance is with a capital expenditure, you pay now and you pay later, right? Because money comes out of cash, you do an initial investment, you build up the asset, but then, for tax purposes, you draw the asset down after
Appreciate
it's
it.
been,
Right.
you depreciate the asset after it's been fully built out. And then there are things where I remember in my finance days, we were in Belgium and we went to the French Riviera for a team building exercise. And I had to have a conversation with my manager, like, you can't capitalize this. This is an expense. And so it's things like that where I think if a CISO is having a conversation with a CFO or a senior leader, and she or he is able to you know, provide that contextual understanding of, okay, the way I'm talking to you now, I'm strictly talking about balance sheet activity, right? We had an incident, and because of that incident, we're going to have to buy our risk down, and we're going to do it through putting in this capability. That capability is going to take us a year, 18 months. Once that capability is fully built, we're going to have to draw it down, and it's going to have an impact on the P&L. And L. And then once you hit the P&L, you start talking about things like EBITDA, working capital, cost of goods sold, all those really boring, fancy things that even though we may not want to know it, it's important, I think, to have that business conversation, just by understanding basic financial concepts.
Yeah, it's well. I always talk, and I've got a few people who have talked about how important it is to understand business, the business, to be a good CISO and to make sure that your security program works and the business buys into it. You need to understand what the business does to make money and how they're doing, and I think that's feeds right into like having that at least I wouldn't call it basic for me, but maybe some people would say basic knowledge of accountancy and understanding how it goes. Because certainly, if you're a CISO that's lucky enough to sort of speak to the board and have a lot of C-level conversations, and it's unfortunate in some businesses that's not the case, being able to have a conversation with your CFO and then your CEO and perhaps have your CFO on board when you're
Right.
talking about the projects you want to do must be really powerful. Well, we didn't plan to talk about your LinkedIn Live, and actually, this is obviously being recorded, so it'll probably be a few weeks before we get this out. Your LinkedIn Live might have already passed, but I'm sure they'll be able to get it. Tell me a little bit about that, and then also remind me when you do it. Send me a message so I can share it.
Oh no, so I haven't. I have in fact, I just talked about it with Larry just to get his perspective on it. But I haven't done the LinkedIn Live. More likely than not, it's going to go out, I would say, middle of February towards middle to end of February. Give
Okay.
folks enough time to prepare and plan for it. And I'll try to do it,
Yeah.
the middle of the day or sometime of the day that's it's convenient for folks to chime in and, or to basically log in and enjoy it. And then obviously the feedback that I get is going to kind of decide where I go with it next. Perhaps there's a lot of interest. Folks like what they're hearing. We could do a series. So, maybe let's do a deeper dive. It'll be a 30 to 40 minute high level, right? But some folks
Yeah.
may have specific questions about cash flow. We could, do a series of balance sheets, cash flow ratios, investments, and things like that. In fact, one of my friends just reached out to me and asked me to present it to their board, a non-for-profit board. So I'll do my best to save that information so folks can reach out to it. I have a separate closed session with my mentees that I'll do to just probably 30 or 40 folks. They'll just come in and
Hmm.
it's a closed session, and we'll be able to kind of go through the more detailed version of that.
I mean, it sounds to me like it's got a lot of legs and like sounds quite a unique. No, but none of the other CISOs I've sort of spoke to have really talked about this sort of thing. So I think it's got some like uniqueness to it, and if you're the one that's known for doing that, that's pretty powerful opportunity. Who knows? Maybe I'll be when we release this, it'll be going out a similar time or whatever. But I'll be happy to promote it, and who knows? Maybe there's a book in there. Sounds like there could be.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's how do we empower our colleagues? How do we grow the industry? They say, what is the saying? A rising tide lifts all boats, right? How do we, help each other, support each other, provide, and it's free. I'm not charging
Yeah.
anything for the course. I think it's we need to support each other. We're a young industry, um, and we need to work together to ensure that our legacy is built on a solid foundation for those who come behind us, they have a solid kind of baseline to start with, and that includes having basic financial understanding of concepts that drive business objectives.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's pretty powerful and useful when you're working, or when you've been working for a venture capital firm that is all about those numbers, right? That's why they're making investments. They want to know all the ins and outs of what's going on. So that's I've seen the move that you made into sort of KKR's VC firm, right, with investments. And then into their portfolio companies is something I'm seeing more and more of. And so that's an interesting. How did you get into the VC firm in the first place? And then have you got any tips of once you're in there? Because I see a lot of people advising and on advisory boards. But how do you turn that into an actual sort of excuse me, a job?
Yeah, so I think for KKR private equity, they how I got in. Um, and it's through networking. And at some point, we'll
Yeah.
talk about that, right? But I think my network, I heard something earlier today that says your network is your net worth.
Right.
I think I've interviewed probably 25 people in the last 15 days, and it's all about, I have this thing where for the next 30 days, I'm going to provide critique of your resume, interview tips. I'm going to do mock interview, and it's just been overwhelming the requests that I've been getting. And one of the things I tell people is that if you're using LinkedIn to search for a job or Indeed, that should probably be your last option. Your network is going to be a lot more powerful. So, to come back to the question, how did I get into the private equity space? I have a great, I consider him a mentor now. We're part of a WhatsApp chat group, probably 425 security professionals from interns all the way up to CISOs. And I'm a blabber, so I talk. Someone raises a question in the chat, I say, "Here's how you solve it." And he reached out to me privately, and he said, "Hey, I have a role that's opening up in Optiv. Why don't you? I'd love to talk to you about it." And I remember because I was in Dubai. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. He had just gotten home from work, or it was it was just a weird time. And we
Yeah.
talked, and by the time I got back from Dubai, I had an offer in my inbox. So it's, the power of networking cannot be underestimated.
Wow. Yeah, that is an amazing example of a lot of the stuff that we talk about. And we're 100% going to come back to that because at some point in a bit we'll talk about being a hiring manager and how you get those opportunities to be in front of people. Yeah, I do warn you that when this goes out, you're going to have a million requests of how they get on that WhatsApp group. Well, let's end part one of our interview with Chris Carter there, shall we? And we'll follow up next week with part two, when we'll be talking to Chris more about his experience, his opinions on hiring, and also the piece of advice that he would give his early career self. So see you back next week. Thank you for listening to the Route to CISO podcast. If there's something you really want me to ask on the next episode, or if you're a CISO who wants to inspire the next generation, please reach out. I'll leave a URL to my LinkedIn profile and make sure you connect and message me there. We're always looking for feedback, so please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.